What's up guys, it's Drac and it's time to talk about the NERF Hyper flagship. Let's go. Alright guys, so this is the Mach-100 from NERF. This is a Hasbro official one. I bought it on Amazon for 70 bucks, proving that a launch model flagship just doesn't get you what it used to. First off, that's more expensive than any other launch model flagship we've had in a long time. And second off, like for something that's just so clearly redundantly rival, you would think that they would continue on that improvement and iteration, but instead they changed the size up so that they could give us what appears to be, by all elements, a strictly worse PERSES. Now, $70 is a ton of money for a toy. That has not been lost on me over the course of my reviewing and modifying and nerfing career. But usually when you start getting into that territory with any manufacturer, you're getting something pretty serious that performs really nicely out of the box. And at this point, I've seen enough sponsored content on the Mach-100 that I have some pretty heavy bias. I'm very excited to bring you the first review without any bias on the Mach-100. So let's go ahead and take it out of the box. Let's see kind of what we're working with. The ergonomics and aesthetics of it actually look pretty good. They look to my taste. But before we do that, let's go on the back. It just says 50 round reload canister, easy reloads. They want to point out that if you spend even more money, you could have these reload canisters, which are effectively like really, really bad paintball pods. You do have to buy those separately. In tiny itty bitty text down here, it says not included on both these. Then it says this is fully motorized between the rev trigger and the other content. We know that it's full auto. Down here it says includes blasters, 80 rounds, eyewear, and instructions. So I do want to point out they're also incorrect. It says NERF Hyper rounds are compatible only with NERF Hyper blasters. That's just not true. Liar! The NERF Hyper rounds work at least with the Dart Zone monolith. I know that for a fact, and I'm pretty sure that because of that, they would work with rival blasters. Not well, per se, but I mean, they don't work very well in stock Hyper blasters either. Let's go ahead and take this one out of the package, see what we're working with completely. Okay, so in the package itself, you get the blaster. You get a kind of clamshell attachment of the 80 Hyper rounds that they include. You get a thing of instructions, and that's about it, with the exception of this down here. This is included eye protection. So I guess that Hasbro finally decided that if they were going to go over 100 FPS, and they finally did, they would start giving you the eye protection as opposed to just making you purchase really bad face masks separately. But I think that this whole packaging here is evidence that we should just be expecting more from our toy manufacturers. And in a world where most toy manufacturers are happy to deliver more, this is just shamefully shy in two different ways. And like, it's never gonna get better if we keep supporting products that just are this incredibly short-sighted and greedy. So first off, the blaster is called the Mach-100, claiming that it holds 100 rounds because it does, and they include only 80. The only possible explanation to short you on 20 balls that cost less than a cent is there is no explanation. There's literally no explanation, but it's the same thing that motivates you to, when including eyeglasses, pick the cheapest ones that you could possibly find from a foreign supplier, to the degree that there's no hyper marking on them whatsoever, right? These are completely transparent, three-part construction glasses. And if it's not bad enough that the glasses are incredibly cheap and not cool in any sort of way, it's also just unbelievable to me that mine comes scratched out of the package. Like, I bought this off Amazon. It came with glasses, which I want to congratulate Hasbro on, but it costs literally nothing to customize glasses for a massive product launch like this at the quantities that you need to ship this sort of stuff. And it's just really, really flagrantly shameful that we can't get a NERF logo on the side without paying $12 for it, or a Hyper logo over here, or like any sort of molding. I mean, I guess the only saving grace is that they do break without shattering, so at least you won't have sharp edges on your super cheap glasses. But we're actually here to talk about the blaster itself. Like, this is the primary class PERSES competitor to the, I mean, let's at least get the ammo inside before we pass judgment. So I want to tilt the camera down real quick. All right, you guys down here with me? Because I counted these twice, and I didn't want to be super duper petty about this, but it's actually just ludicrous. So each one of these is 20. So this is 60 rounds. Blaster is supposed to include 80 rounds. Then you've got 15 more, then 16. So even if you count the one sample touch me round that sits in the box up here, they still shorted me 3 rounds. It's just kind of frustrating. You don't even have to look that hard anymore to see that Hasbro just has no regard for the customer at all at this point. First grade counting skills will reveal to you everything you need to know about customer satisfaction value over at the mothership these days. So blaster is going to take 60 batteries, as we've discussed in other videos in the past. 60 batteries is going to run you everywhere from $12 to $15. So a functionally $70 blaster is actually, to be functional, a functionally $70 blaster is going to cost you about $82, $85. Now, as far as this works, they've got a compliant mechanism in here. It's actually pretty good. The tolerances on this are significantly better than something like, say, Elite 2.0. Let's go ahead and take our first 20 rounds. And if we take a look inside there, you can see that we're using an agitator system that's almost exactly like how the Rival PERSES and Nemesis were working. Once you've got this open, there's no flare to it, actually, and I feel like the pods would have to have a pretty wide mouth to load effectively, because the clumping issue with this rubber ammo is such that it really doesn't want to, and it's so bouncy. It's not as easy to load as Rival was. As somebody who used Rival with paintball pods very, very frequently over the course of their Rival battling adventure, this ain't it. There we go. All right. So I'll be able to load all 76 of the rounds that my blaster came with pretty easily here with room to spare. I could very easily fit the full 100 if, you know, Hasbro had deigned any sort of generosity upon us. Over here we have a selector switch, which is realistically just a trigger safety. When it's down, you can't pull anything. When it's up, you can pull the rev switch and then follow it up by pulling the main trigger. Overall grip is actually quite nice if you have pretty large hands. In my case, everything fits pretty comfortably. I can even reach the switch pretty easily. This ledge between the rev switch and the grip itself is actually not the most comfortable. Putting Picatinny rail down here is only good if you're going to gimmick up some sort of ammo holding thing, and you really don't want it there because that's the part where your arm is going to cross over while you're battling, and you would very easily knock it off of the faux tinny. Up here you can put your red dot. You can't put a back optic, but you can put a front optic, and then it's got a, well, dang. It's got a pop-up optic. The first time you push it up, you're gonna have to break it in. It's kind of cute. It's not bad, especially since it folds away into nothing if you're not super duper into it. Here is kind of like a place that you could put a bandolier. You could also put one through here. Realistically, you're looking for one of these holes and then probably one down here for a 2-pointer. Up here is your grip. Your grip's gonna have all the weight of those batteries in here. 6D batteries can be pretty hefty, but you know, this is your foregrip. This is your stock. Everything else is relatively comfortable in terms of how it was ergonomically designed, although both this grip and the stock panel would be better with that slightly rubberized plastic we've started to see on some of the Pro blasters or even some of the entry-level Adventure Force blasters. The muzzle design is pretty sharp. The overall 90s integration, the fact that it has paint on both sides, is quite nice. We're going to complement that when it happens. In particular, this sort of carbon fiber mold release finish is really, really nice. Inside you see pretty standard Rival-esque flywheels. You've got the ribbed sort of concave flywheels through that itty bitty jam door there. Pretty decent look at those. And that means that this is going to perform more or less how Rival blasters do. The one thing that is not present and will be a painful omission is going to be there is no hop-up tab, which means that the dimpled rounds are going to go basically wherever they dang well please. Hopefully that can be fixed in the future. As we head downstairs and give you a full chronograph and range test, I have something very, very exciting to show you that we've done to fix the Rush 40. But for the time being, let's take this one downstairs, get it in the light, showcase some of the aesthetic a little bit more, and see how it performs. All right, guys, 6 brand new D batteries in there so we can get the best numbers we possibly can expect. Blaster becomes very front heavy when it's out like this. Now, realistically, anyone who's spending $70 on a blaster product is probably over the age of 14, which is the recommended age bracket for Hyper in the first place. But if you're not, like, this is gonna be, it'll quickly get a little tiring. The weight distribution is very poorly forward. All of the motors, all of the electronics, all of the batteries, and most of the plastic is in front of the trigger. So there's really nothing behind here on this thin stock to even it out. That said, two-handed, not the end of the world. Let's put a couple over the chronograph, keeping in mind that this ammo is incredibly precious. A commenter recently was like, Drac, you fire in the same place all the time, and you still haven't put up some sort of dart catching net device. And that's a great idea, and I'll do it really soon. I never thought about it, proving that sometimes a second opinion is well worth having. Okay, so our first shot is 105, and it did feed reliably. Let's put a few full autos over. And in full auto, we get to, you know, low 90s, mid 90s, and that's just to be expected. After all, single shots are gonna have more time to build up torque to deliver onto the flywheels. 93, 110, the elusive 110, single shots going in excess of 110, rounds going everywhere, and you really have to feather the trigger to preserve any sort of select fire, I guess. To get single shots, you have to be pretty careful because the rate of fire is relatively high. Now, it's not as high as the PERSES, which in some ways could be construed as a good thing. The PERSES empties itself rather quickly after all, but we're gonna fire a few downrange. Our chambering has been relatively good so far, kind of holding it flat and level. Let's throw a few downrange and just kind of measure the overall accuracy. So one double feed there, kind of interesting, and the accuracy is not that bad up to about 40 feet, but anything beyond that is sort of a crapshoot as the dimpling in the balls takes over. They just go in whichever direction their souls desire. And once that effect is taken over, they're kind of just gone. So the maximum range, if we angle this, is gonna be, and we have to be careful angling it because I imagine we'll get some misfeeds, but if we angle a few, the balls came out at the same time and fired off of one another. I don't know, for some reason mine keeps double feeding, and when it double feeds, the balls kind of play off of one another out of the flywheels and go nowhere close. The maximum range for the ones that went even moderately straight would be about 75, 80 feet, and then when it hits 75, 80 feet, obviously it's gonna bounce pretty far. We still have no comment or way to address how Jinx is gonna feel about the hyper rounds, what with them being small and not necessarily chewable. I think that they certainly pose some sort of choking hazard to her, so luckily we're keeping them out of the yard, and we're gonna be very diligent in their collection, which by the way is another reason that I counted up the ammo before we started. However, I do wanna mention one thing. If you've decided that NERF Hyper is somewhere that you wanna be, and something that you want to mess with, I have completed my mod guide for the Rush 40, but given how much content we're editing right now, I have not had a ton of time to launch it. The one thing that I do want to talk about is over on Foam Pro Shop, we have made a muzzle device specifically to fix what I think is just an error in judgment. This is a 3-part muzzle device over here. It looks a lot like this outside of the package, which is to say that it's this back piece for gap filling and clean printing. This one hasn't been touched up yet. And then this front piece, which has probably already been glued in, but is effectively a hop-up muzzle tab. Given that Hasbro solvent welded the original one, the only way we could think of to develop a better version was to develop a whole better version. What it does is, and after playing with 9 different iterations, it gives us a hop-up tab that when glued in, allows us to fire far more accurately because it gives you predictable spin on the rounds. I could fire them over the chronograph. I don't even remember if we have the K25 in here right now or if it's been fully modified, but if you watch and slow down the footage, these are much more predictable shots. They tend to go straighter now. It also levels them out, which is pretty good. You don't get any of this woo! I also want to point out, having played with all of the blasters at this point, that the Rush 40, in addition to being the cheapest of them, seems to functionally, effectively be the best of them. And by virtue of being a pistol in a compact form with this much capacity, if you're going to be using the hyper ammo, I think that our muzzle is like a necessity to make sure that you can actually competitively use this blaster to hit targets behind cover. So that's just our take. This is again the Foam Pro Shop muzzle. I wanted to mention it in this video because I just don't know when we're going to be able to talk comprehensively about the lock pattern in this blaster, how to take it apart, make it a little more functional. But the biggest thing that we did to it, because the spring is an unnecessary but very easy swap to either a standard K26 or K25, the biggest thing that we developed was the hop-up tab. Are we going to do one for the Mach-100? I'm sure we'll get to it eventually, but this blaster is such an insult to anybody who really loves NERF that it almost feels bad. It's legitimately heartbreaking, just everything from the packaging and the marketing to go in and make what is effectively a bad PERSES a little bit better. I'm far more interested to see if there's a way to take a blaster like the PERSES, which has a rechargeable battery built in and really features the best of what Rival's kind of planned obsolescence had to offer. I'd like to see if we can make that fire hyper even remotely reliably with perhaps some sort of different aperture to feed. After all, the agitator and the conveyor belt are very, very similar. But that is my review of the Hyper Mach-100. I try not to give like overall recommendations very, very often, but I think that this is one that definitely should only be picked up if you could find it on sale. It will, I imagine, wind up under 50 United States dollars very, very quickly, given that it's an expensive product that's not particularly reliable in terms of hitting targets at range. Overall, it is a very high rate of fire machine gun. And if you don't mind, you know, some of the ammo hiccups and what have you, then, you know, it's definitely a fine flagship entry model. It's going to be very exciting and interesting to see where they go with Hyper from here. I'm not sure if they're going to make magazines. I want to know if they're going to abandon the hopper strategy, but it seems like with all the reloads being marketed as this like special pod thing, that this is the direction they're going to take it. If you've already got your Mach-40, I highly recommend checking out our part over on Foam Pro Shop. Stay tuned, get subscribed, hit the bell, please. That way you won't miss our mod guide. And if you're interested in any of the Hyper products, I do have affiliate links in the Amazon description box down below. It's just, if you're gonna buy them anyway, you might as well support somebody who cares, because clearly the people profiting the most don't. Thank you guys so much for watching. Much love, blast on, Drac out.